welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod. So I know I said that the patrons had voted for me to separate out videos to sort of talk about the different features of the cat, but I thought while I was doing that I could also just have a video while I'm adding in the rest of the face. Not the nose, that's a separate video, and the ears are a separate video, and then the eyes and the whiskers will also be separate videos, but this is adding in kind of everything in between, so let's get started. Alright, we may be speeding some of this up, but I thought maybe I could go ahead and show you. So this is the cat we've been working on, right? So we got the ears, we got the nose. It's actually, I'm designing him after my baby, my darling Spike, who died a few years ago. And so I thought it might be interesting to see me actually actively coloring it in. As you can tell, I've laid down the base, so now we're going to start with the lighter color. Now he did have a little bit of a black line kind of surrounding the top of his nose. It wasn't very prominent, so I am going to come up to the edge but not go all the way. Gotta make sure I stick to the color changes in his fur because he has a lot. So someone had requested I do a mackerel tabby. I didn't know what a mackerel tabby was, but when I looked it up I realized that my last cat was a mackerel tabby. So what better thing to do than to model it after my baby? So yeah, it's just filling it in, being mindful that the light source again is coming from the right side of the screen or the left side of the cat, so I'll be shadowing that way. You can see I layer on the heavy stuff first, and then I back off as I come to the left side because I've got to make a decision at what point the light will start shifting into shadow. And it's always easier, as I've mentioned in other videos, it's always easier for me to make a transition where I've backed off on how hard I'm pressing the pen, right? So I'm pressing pretty hard right now and it's layering it on thick, but once I get to that edge I'll start feathering that out so that I have a chance to sort of build on the shadows where it makes the most sense. So the reason I'm stopping where I am, right, like I'm coming up to this top, is there's actually a color change that happens to like an off kind of color fur, a brownish grayish kind of fur. I'll jump around to different colors as I sort of complete it out and work on it more and more. That gives me a better idea of exactly what I'm doing, how it's shaping up, where that transition will be. So now we're going to go under his eye. And this is the side on the light source, so the whole thing will definitely be in highlight. I'm also a habitual saver because I have learned, especially when it gets warmer outside, my Photoshop will sometimes freeze and crash, and if I don't save it, then there goes everything I've done since my last save, and that's a very sad day when that happens. Now, just like I do right now, I'm feathering out that edge, so just like I do on the edge of the faces of things where I've talked about before, you know, if you have the light source in front of an object, all edges are going to have a shadow, including the side that has the light source. The only time the light source, the edge will be in highlight is if the light source were coming directly from the side. And since it's not, it's coming from above and kind of in front of, then even the side that has that light source will be in shadow because it's not directly on that side. I do the same because their cheeks or their lips go have that edge before it drops down to the rest of their face. Now this inside ledge all the way up to the nose will likely be in shadow because that is turning away from the face, right? Like that's rounding down because their cheeks are roundish, so there's going to be a little bit of a shadow here. And I'll figure out exactly where that final placement will be. and then we'll layer on the thick. So all I'm really doing, right, is I'm putting my pin pressure down in the direction of the hair I've already drawn. So a lot of that sketching, that first sketch when I lay down that base layer, helps me decide what direction I'm going to do, because now I don't really have to think about it as much. I can just put the pin pressure in and follow the direction of that hair. The only thing I have to make sure that I get right are the placement of the shadows and the highlights. And feather that out. It's also got, Spike has some white that I'll throw in too, and it's easier to mix colors when I'm lightening that out. Now, even though I am going to end up adding a lot of highlight here, it's probably not going to be the full way across, and so I'm going to go ahead and just lightly add in the color instead of putting full pin pressure. And that'll give me the control to decide where the highlight goes. But it will come up under his eye because his eye socket comes back out, right? Like our eyes recess into our heads and then the socket comes back out, and where that comes back out, it'll catch the light. So I'm gonna go ahead and add just a little bit of light under his eye. And we'll make that brighter as I go. Now I will be adding some burst of light to his lip, but I always start very lightly on it so that I have more control over where I'm adding that. I think I have his chin maybe too narrow, but as I go to shadow and highlight that, I may widen it up. Now I do have trouble sometimes telling different colors apart in this very light sketch, and I'm having trouble with him as well. So after I'm done with his lip here, I'm probably going to have to pop off one of those layers so that I can see where my colors are. Make sure I'm actually adding highlights and shadows to the right one. I'll also need to go back and fix the side of his lip on the left. But that's going to be something I'll need to back out for. Looks like I didn't quite get him nice and even. Looks a little jagged. Their noses are flush to their face, so we wouldn't really, it wouldn't be blocking a lot of light. Now when I'm doing this, I do sort of let the pin brush against, but I don't have to put full pin pressure, because it'll, by layering up the color, I achieve the same effect as if I put full pin pressure. Anywhere there's a drawing line, I try to add a lighter pin stroke to even that out. Sometimes that's easier to see from far away. It's one of the reasons I like to pull back when I'm drawing, is so I can see the whole image, get a sense for how it's coming together. I may add more as we go on, but we'll see. It's a lot easier to layer it up than to take any away, so I try very hard not to make a mistake when I'm adding the thick lines. It's possible to remove it, it's just a lot harder to do. So I'd rather forego adding extra work for myself. Once I add in the other hair again, I will likely be making some adjustments. So all of this is full pin pressure, but as I come next to his eye, well, one, you can see I've left a gap under his eye, right? There's that gap there. As I come next to it, I will also be leaving a little bit of a gap so that I can feather out. It's going to be a lighter pin pressure, basically, because it's under the eye. It's where it's going into shadow, because it's rounding down away from us. Because our eyes are a bulge right? Like we're on the back side of that bulge down through here. But only for part of it because of how it'll be, like his nose then kicks in. So, right, so here we're already probably back where the hump of his nose is now in. So we would once again resume full pin pressure and then make sure that we bridge the gap and feather that in. Now on this side, his forehead still full pin pressure, so this is still going to be catching the light. But as we come around towards this side, we'll start feathering that out. But I have to be careful because as it goes to that back side of the nose, some of this may be going into shadow. Right, so this is going to be shadow because it's just like the other side. When you get to the underside of the eye, you know, it's rounding away from the light source. So it would be in shadow. So when I'm adding highlights like this, what I'm looking for is for the hair or the shape to be rounding away from the light source. That's when I'm going to start applying shadow. Just like I do under the eyes, right? I wait for that to round down. Sorry about the plane going overhead. But this would still be in highlight until we start sort of coming over. Now I'm going to switch it over to a shadow. We're going to bridge the gap because some of this is going to be in highlight. I left myself enough room to do that typically. Sometimes I'm over aggressive about how I'm adjusting. This is still, because I have, so try to make sure my lines make sense, right? Because I have that highlight coming way over to here, that means this top edge also needs it. Just a little. Doesn't have to be a lot, but I am going to need to give it a little bit more of a flare than I do on the back side. And so of course at this point this whole side's in shadow. Right, we're on that back edge. So I know I've talked about this a lot, but I was checking several things. One, I was confused on how I sketched this, so I was trying to figure out what I was doing, and I think it's just a gap, which is fine. But two, I needed to see that edge to make sure that I knew that this was the edge, right? So I'm putting full pin pressure, but I won't when I get to the edge of his face. Right, I think that's all of that. So now we'll start a new layer. And so sometimes, you know, you've seen it where I have little color swatches down here. I didn't do that with him because if I can layer on these thick enough, I can often get a color read without needing to, I may even change that. It seems a little gray. I feel like he was more brown. We'll see. It's Photoshop, so it's easy for me to change it. I do think that's too gray though. Get it wrong. That's always fun. He's more of a say down in here. Start another layer, and I'm just going to fill. If I decide it needs to be gray again, it'll be easy, relatively easy to switch back. But I'm going to leave the underdrawing as it is. I should have reference pictures of him so that I can double check. I feel like I would know what my boy looks like, but sometimes it's little details that you don't realize you don't know. Of course, I also feel like I was very careful when I chose this color to begin with, but here we are. So what I'm checking here, right, like as his head comes up and around, obviously this backside's going to be in shadow, but it'll probably be in highlight all the way up. So these lines for this color would likely still be catching the light based on where my light source is. But like if it was going behind his ear or something else, I'd need to be mindful of that because his ear would cast a shadow. Now I'll be doing his eyes as a separate video. I've already done his nose and ears as a separate video. So we won't be finishing this out with his eyes or his whiskers. Both of those will be separate videos. I'm also saying that so that I remember instead of just forging ahead. But once we get to the eyes and the whiskers, I'm almost done. That's like the finishing touches. The eyes are typically the last thing I do. Some of what I'm being careful of is I want to make sure that it's clear that his lips, cheeks are more forward than the section that I'm drawing right now. So, you know, this should look more forward than the lower part. So I'm trying to be careful on how I'm adding in. So now we're on that other side, which means we're back into shadow. Partly. So I still have to match it, right? So this section that comes here, I need to have a little burst of highlight because this does. And then go into shadow. Now we're going to need to give this a little bit of highlight as well. All right, come on. Right, because we have the highlight right under here, so this is going to have just that little bit coming off his cheek. So that there's not a highlight shift happening in the middle of a color change. Otherwise it looks like the color's doing the changing and not the light source. But we're on the home stretch here, so all we have after this is to add in basically whatever color we are using for his base here, but sparse it more out into his stripes. But I'm going to have to get his base color all set. Sometimes when I'm far enough away, I have a hard time drawing where I want it to go. End up drawing in the same spot over and over again and making it a highlight when I don't mean for it to be. But luckily I can just zoom in. Solves that problem. Okay. Alright, we're all color. Man, kind of looks pretty though, doesn't it? So this is really easy. I'm just going to select it. I'm going to nudge it. Unselect the layer all of this was on, start a new layer, and then I'm just going to hit fill with the foreground color. And now we have a slightly grayer. So, I know I mentioned before I love to let black stand where it can, but because his head goes into so much black up here, I have to be able to define that, in which case I have to color it in. I just will be very careful. I know I've said several times that I've modified how I present black many times. So all I'm going to do is lightly fill in. Not putting a lot of pen pressure. This will probably take a few minutes because I'm being very conscious of every stroke at the moment. Right, like I don't want to overdo it. I may end up changing this color too to more of a desaturated. Black I tend to trend towards gray just more effective at indicating that it's black. And I think the brown might be making it too brown instead of making it seem blackish. We'll see. I'm going to actually take this and make it grayer. Instead of brown. So that it shows up more as black. You can see that difference there. Reads more like black than brown now. Maybe if we stick with that. Alright, but let me... I think I need... We'll see if I stay happy with this chin or I decide to change it. Yeah, I think we're gonna keep his chin a little wider here. So I'm already starting to push it into shadow now, because we're already on the other side of the hump. All right, so that is how you draw out the face of a cat. I know that is a long video. I've tried to speed it up where I thought I wasn't really talking a lot and maybe in areas where it gets a little boring. But if you did have any questions or comments, please drop them down below. If you did like this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Thank you so much. Take care.